I'll start by answering the question that I ask everybody. What would you describe as the primary pillars of your creative practice? And a lot of people answer this question with three pillars. Sometimes I have to explain what pillars means. And to me, like pillars is like what forms the foundation of an artist's work and ethos. And so for me, I wrote down four things. And the first thing is musical efficiency. And I don't want this to be confused with the kind of systematic tendencies. I have tried to be a systematic composer. I don't think that I am. But to me, musical efficiency is being smart with the materials that I use. And so devising a kind of interconnectedness among materials that are used within any given piece. And so this could show up in a variety of ways. It could be like deriving rhythm from harmony or vice versa. It could be like I mentioned fractal music earlier, where like smaller components of the piece kind of add up to reflect like the bigger narrative in some way. Recently, I completed a piano piece where there are these really kind of like very high notes at the start of the piece that are played in this kind of sporadic nature. And in another part of the piece, I bring those same exact pitches back, but in a different register, in a different context. And I'm not sure, I don't think like people will be able to hear it. I don't think it's this kind of musical efficiency is for people to hear. It's just like it's like what makes it fun for me. So kind of like, like the sum of its parts, kind of that kind of saying. That's how I think about a lot of my pieces and where I come from when I'm writing. It's a very much part of my process. This idea of musical efficiency. On the flip side of that, I just mentioned that, I've dabbled in systematic composition, and, where that kind of came from was this presumption on my part that I needed to be able to explain like how I made something. Musical efficiency is a little bit of like where I landed with that, but I was trying to like do the systematic thing, like to produce material and be able to explain stuff. And it just like, it didn't feel good. And so I began composing from a very intuitive place. And so I've come to really rely on and trust my musical intuition. And so a lot of the music now that I make, other than like the musical efficiency stuff that I just described, I can't tell you like the rhyme or reason of how I devise a harmonic language or rhythmic language in my music. I just mostly do it because it sounds right. And sounding right is subjective, of course. But I know when it's not right. And so much of my process these days is maybe putting something down on the page, putting it into a notation software to be able to listen to it, and recognizing what is right about it, what is not right about it, and what can I do to get it closer to the music that feels like it wants to be. I think that's what I just described as like a very composer thing. I would never say that any of the stuff I'm describing is like unique or special to the way I work. But intuition, I've started in that place, I've left it, and then I've only recently like come to trust it again, I think. And kind of in this vein of intuition is an attempt to convey something organic in my music. And so a lot of times that manifests rhythmically, trying to separate, the sonic results of music from like pulse orientation. I really started thinking about this because, where I grew up in a very rural community, agricultural, industrial kind of community in Kentucky of like 8,000 people, and went to college, in Moorhead, Kentucky, which is also like in the middle of Daniel Boone National Forest, and not a very, like when school lets out for the summer, there's like no one in town except the townies, which I think it might be derogatory to say. But at any rate, nature was like a big part of my life, has always been a big part of my life. And so in walking through the woods, for example, it's like you're not going to come across like a rigid cube shape in the woods unless it's man-made. Yes, nature can produce these things, but mostly it's like you're not going to see like repetition of things out in nature. And so like I thought that was like that's what I wanted my music to sound like. I wanted it to sound like very organic, even improvised. I didn't want people to be able to like feel the pulse, for example, which I keep going deeper and deeper into with the projects I work on. So I think like that again, like kind of comes back to intuition, how can I think of making something sound organic? I guess you could systematize that, but I don't know how. And so I rely on my intuition. Another pillar of my creative practice is increasingly like a vibe of like ritual and patience. I've thought about ritual in my music for a while. There's been pieces I've produced that's like, this kind of feels like a little ritual, like whether it's the setup of the instruments, like there's a piece I wrote for clarinet, euphonium, and percussion that's like, the percussion is like flower pots are hanging, and it felt like kind of like a ritual setup. And I recently went to a performance of a piece in Covington, Kentucky, which is right across the river from where I live in Cincinnati, and it was in this like kind of art space that had a gallery and a theater, and I walk in to the art gallery, and like I've been thinking about this idea of ritual a lot lately, especially in regards to like a piece that I just finished. And on the wall is like the name of this exhibit in the gallery, and like it took my breath away because it said Notations on a Ritual. And I thought, what in the world? Like such a serendipitous kind of moment for me. And I'll read a little bit. I wish I knew who to credit for this. The curator is someone named Sora Kong. So maybe they wrote this, but I'll just read a little bit of this because I took a photo of it, and it felt like so aligned with like where my music is heading. And it's that the inaction of ritual is compositional. There's a musicality regarding its temporality, pace, repetition, and interpretive performance. Actions parallel to notations, a mark-making tool to indicate sound within a compositional score. Like notations on a score, they incite action, but also indicate action. They empty spaces between the notes. It can indicate tempo, rhythm, volume, speed. And so like, this is like talking about a musical score. Like there was nothing musical in this. It's like ceramics and paintings and stuff like that. But, it's like, feels so aligned with, I think, what I'm trying to achieve, like a ritual of like gesture through music and like the psychology of the score. It's like, these are all things that I'm starting to think about. And then like a sense of patience. So ritual and patience. Patience, allowing for more space, more time. And I've spoken before, I don't think on the podcast, but elsewhere, of how this idea of patience and stillness and, that's kind of like my answer to the world around me and like the life that I find myself in that's like full of deadlines and meetings, and like I just want to like get away from all that. And so, rather than like creating maybe like an anxiety inducing music, which has its purpose and that I enjoy sometimes, I really want to like savor the space and the moments that occur musically in my music. And I want listeners to savor that as well. The last thing I'll talk about with pillars is something that other people usually bring up when I ask them this question, but I feel the same for me. And that's curiosity. Curiosity has served me so well in my adult life and my professional life. And not just curiosity, but curation. And this is within music and elsewhere in my life. So always learning something, of course, that's curiosity. Kind of like going down the rabbit holes seeing where things take me. Like if I ask questions and want to find answers, that's curiosity. But like being very intentional about the way I curate stuff in my life as well, like what I consume, what I experiment with, what I look for, I see it as curation. I guess you could simply say like intention, but it really is like trying to like surround myself with meaningful artistic objects and otherwise for musical purposes, but also for other purposes in other aspects of my life. Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.